All right, so here we have David Allen, and he's right. So I'm recording, and it's great to see you. I love your office. So there it is. So welcome, David.
Thanks, Jesu. Always delighted to chat with you.
So basically, like I was saying, part of my process of staying mentally healthy, physically healthy, spiritually healthy is basically staying away from the areas that I know get me in trouble. Facebook, all that social media, I'm out. I actually discipline myself so I only hang around friends that will keep the conversation moving in a much more upward fashion than a divisive fashion. So
Hey, smart, good call.
so I told Nicole last night, I go, I decided to lower the noise of outside so I can hear the inner voice and the inner sounds. And so I practice trying to keep myself clean that way, not always perfect, but I wanted to see if you could touch on what's happening, not the news, but I actually, lastly, let me just tell you what was going on, because everyone's saying Mercury retrograde and all this stuff. I decided to attack it in such a way that I was, whatever I was looking at that I didn't fix, that I didn't approach, or that I didn't face in my apartment, 750 square feet, I would then go fix it. If the faucet that I've been looking at for 3 years had this particular filter that I should have changed, I'm changing it. If the I'm tired of the core of the cord blinds, I decided to get cordless blinds. So when I started to attack the things around my house, I was completely in heaven. I felt totally relieved, almost like what you're saying in your book when you're cleaning that drawer, when there's nothing to do, maybe the soul's out of your body, a lot of it is, and you're just doing nothing around the house, so you're cleaning that drawer. So there you go, David, go. And see, is there anything that you can um, share with people about your process, or what you're observing, or what your awarenesses are about staying healthier in all uh, aspects of our lives during these times?
I guess, what pops to mind, Jesus, is that, for so many years, I was enthralled with the sort of romantic idea of spiritual, enlightenment and spiritual training and spiritual coaching and whatever. And, basically wanted to leave the world and get on JR staff. And, how many times he slapped me around and go, no, that's not your game. He said, by the way, it's as funky and strange on staff as it is anywhere in the world. Don't kid yourself. So, you might as well get rid of that sort of. And then he asked me, how much money are you making? And I said, well, he said, not enough. I said, well, so, the guy kicked me in the butt, not often, but at sort of the most appropriate moments to say, look, I'm here to do something different than that. I don't have a spiritual teaching mantle. I have a healing mantle, just by expressing myself and just showing up. If I'm in my positive game, I just create freedom for people around me. That's that's what my ministry is. So, relaxing about that, and then just saying, let me go fix the friggin' toilet. I'm here. It's a physical world. If you don't like the physical world, why don't you pick one? Why are you here? So as long as you're here, and again, as I said in my book, look, if you like what you're doing, you want to be able to do it with more elegance and ease. If you don't like what you're doing, but you still have to do it as fast and as quick as you can so you can get onto the cool stuff you like to do. Duh. So a lot of my stuff was just kind of the duh of this world. You're in this world. So I think a lot of the people on the spiritual path, and that's with the small s as well as the big S, um, sort of run into that problem of putting a here versus there about spiritual world versus your material world. The material world is as spiritual as anything else. It's just a lot sort of cruder and more grosser in terms of its vibratory field, but you're here. At one point, JR and I were talking about, male fantasies about sex and all that other stuff. He said, come on, if, there are so many more universes that are so much more sexy than this one. He said, if you let yourself go there, if you want to go there, he said, don't kid yourself. There's a lot of, many mansions in this world out here. But as long as you're in this particular mansion, then I say, well, okay, so just navigate it as elegantly, as fine as you can. And I'm sorry, somebody back there, I think you and I both know, said first law of spirit, acceptance. You have to accept the fact that you want your blinds different. Right? You have to accept. You can't sit there and go, that's not a thing I should be thinking about because I need to think about other stuff. No, come on, grow up. You're thinking about it. What are you going to do about your thoughts about it? So it's kind of, I guess what I uncovered, and I guess what part of my game was to figure out, how do you navigate in this world in such a way that's not versus your spiritual life or your other world, but that just aligns with it. And aligns with it doesn't mean that that cleaning your toilet's going to give you enlightenment, though. Ask any of the Zen monks, or the Sufi masters. Those were a lot of the tricks that they used to get people to focus just on observation and ordinariness. As somebody else you and I know said, ordinariness is next to godliness, right? So getting rid of those fantasies, that took me lots of years. I'll be 75 in December, so I've been hanging out, around JR and this information itself since 1971. What's that? 50 years almost. So I don't know how many of those years, probably 2 or 3 or 4 decades anyway of that. It's like, okay, is this the right thing? Should I be doing what I'm doing? I don't know. Maybe there's a bigger game. And at some point, maybe it's just age. I just said, screw it. I am where it is. I had one of those freeway enlightening moments, that I've talked about at various times that I agonized about, well, what should I be doing? And I don't know, but I want to be doing spiritual work, but I still have this other stuff that I'm involved in, and relationships and women. And, it's like, oh God. At some point, I was driving along the freeway, and it was one of those, suddenly this voice just said, excuse me, David, you have created so much, not only in this lifetime, but in gazillion others. You don't have to worry about where you need to put your focus. All you need to do is handle what's in front of you with elegance and excellence and completion. And the next thing will automatically show up. Believe me, it's lined up. I haven't turned back since then, Jesus. Right? So there's a big relaxation there. Just go, hey, toilet's up. Let's do toilet. And then you experience what you said. You felt heavenly because you were just dealing with the current reality that was in your face and was there, trying to resist that, trying to say, I should be doing something different, or I should have my attention on something different. You're just in resistance mode, right? You're not in acceptance mode. So I guess that's a lot of what I've learned in my 75 years is relax, accept what's present, deal with that with as much elegance and completion as I can, to then make room for whatever the next thing is that's lined up. That's my working hypothesis. Haven't disproved it yet.
Yeah, I totally agree. I wanted to say I ordered my blinds. They were 70 and a half wide. It's also listening and measuring exactly. It's also like the excellence part of this, of what the way that JR taught us, or the way we've all been taught to be exact. What was that? What time? Where? How? And so obviously I didn't quite look. I was over by a 1/4 inch and it wouldn't fit in the window. So I didn't panic. It's been a great learning of workarounds. So I called my Latin friend who had a gallbladder. He doesn't want to do, Corona social distancing. Let's get together. So he says, I'll leave the tools outside my house. Come and get them. So I was in the kitchen sawing off, and they have pliers that actually cut aluminum. So I cut the 1/4 inch. It fit perfect. And I was so delighted last night. I was jumping around like cordless blinds. And I thought, how simple. And that's probably the ordinariness of I guess what JR was talking about, or what people talk about, or I mean, I used to judge so much when I was younger. We'd go on these Japanese tours with JR and Paul and John, and it's like, okay, everybody, we follow what the tour guide's saying, you know, Steve or the Buddhist monk. We'd hit a temple in Kyoto every day at 7 in the morning, drink our green tea, prepared very elaborately, and then we'd stare at a rock and some garden with pebbles. And I used to tell Gerald, "What the hell?" And then I realized there is some. I mean, I think there's a lot to get from that. Eventually, it's like it just allows you to be present, so that you can deal with what's there, and be present, because it's present. It's being present. By the way, you've helped me so much when I would come up and see you and Catherine, and it's about being present and getting away from the past, and by me moving myself out of that space into the new space. And I love what you've said before. uh, I don't know, in your summit, go find someone that you don't know and introduce yourself to, and go learn something new, or something like that. Can you elaborate on that? Because that's really fun, to get out of your space, that then brings the nowness, and then what's next for you to do. Because
Sure.
by you introducing yourself to that person, because I listen in silence, like, go talk to her, and pretty soon that person used to work for the internet company that you want the answer for. And so, can you touch on that?
Yeah. Well, two things come to mind as you say that, kind of at different levels. One is my sort of mentor, sort of pre-movement, was Michael Bookbinder. Way back, and ran across Michael, and we had intense 2 or 3 years together before we ran across JR together. And one of the things Michael told me, what he said, and I've never disproved it. He said, David, all the way wicked coolest things that'll ever happen to you in your life will be because of your willingness to step out of your comfort zone and meet somebody you never met before.
Yeah.
And I've never disproven that. And I'm actually, if you take all the personality stuff, I'm actually an introvert, kind of a closet introvert, because it kind of looks like I'm out there doing a lot of presentation stuff, but that's not. I don't get my juice. I get some juice from that, but I have to then I have to redo my juices by myself, and sort of internally. And so it'd be very easy for me in a way to kind of do rice bowl and cave. I'll get me out of there. But I had a dream, fairly significant experience on the other side, with the spirit, about, I was given the opportunity to say, do you want a healing mantle or not? It was my choice. And I said, I can't choose. I said, whoever you are up there, you choose. So they chose that. And so I got this incredible charge of energy that came down through my hands. So I talked to JR physically in the next few days, and asked him about that. He said, well, your hands represent participation. So all you have to do is play. You just have to be engaged. Don't stop yourself from just engaging. And that has been obviously a deep admonition for me for the last 30, 40 years. It just, because I have to get it up. It's not a natural thing for me to do. I actually have to go, not so much work at it, but I have to direct myself and be willing to say, I'm willing to just go engage. So I get, given the world I'm in now and my kind of reputation out there in the world, I get a lot of requests for people to have coffee with me. They want to meet me, whatever. And I try to take advantage of every one of those that I can, that I have the opportunity to do. And for whatever reason, I never know exactly what comes out of all that. But I just say, but that's one of the main things. So engaging. So that was, part of it. And forget what the other aspect was, because I ran down that rabbit hole, and there was a lot to that, just about, and just in terms of in engaging in that way. I think the other aspect of that is just paying attention to what has your attention, and so learning to say, okay, what's got my attention now about this? I mean, you just said, hey, for some reason I feel like I want to go meet that person. And being willing to follow up on that, even though it may look like I'm going to be awkward, this might feel uncomfortable, this might be out of their comfort zone, I don't know. and your willingness to do that, and the willingness to traverse that, that rail. Um, that's cool stuff. And that's how a lot of my stuff has occurred in my life. I'm not a real entrepreneurial or aspirational or, ta-da, let me go out and rule the world kind of person at all. Uh, but again, back to the the admonition call, just handle what's in front of me, and deal with that as much excellence and elegance as I can. And, it really is about excellence. Well, come on, the ordinariness of life. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. Um, you weren't probably around then, but 1972, when I moved to LA, my first job was with Ted Drake as we were creating Human Enterprises.
Come on, man. I was
And
not. Come on, man. I was 9 years old. Stop it. Go ahead.
and one of the first things we did, Ted and I, Ted, company was, and he was working pretty closely with JR back then, and was create this sort of co-op thing, because this was kind of like, hey, we've got a community, the movement's growing, a bunch of people. How about we create sort of let's buy things together? And actually, people wanted tape recorders because they needed tape recorders to play JR tapes, because JR tapes were starting to come out. So we said, okay, well, let's try to find the best source of the best tape recorders that we can offer them to the MSIA community. So we started researching, tape recorders and tape players and whatever. And so buy them in bulk and then offer them to the movement, to people to do that. And so we created this little business called Human Enterprises. If you ever interview Ted Drake, ask him about it. That was interesting
No,
times.
I have you in the Mystical Traveler movie. I know about the gas station that they bought, and I love what
Yeah,
you say. It's to keep the locomotive going and
yeah.
movement during the gas
And
crisis.
Atman Travel and Human Enterprise. But that was the first sort of experience that we had of our spiritual group trying to get together and make kind of work things cooperatively in the physical world that would be useful to people. So we did that. And one day, I forget what we were looking into, because not only did we find tape recorders, we said, okay, what else can we buy, or what else can we get as a cooperative here that we could then offer to our spiritual community so they can get good products, at a discount, and, we can just serve the community that way. And yada, yada, I forget what happened. And then one day JR shows up in the office. It was an apartment Ted had somewhere in El Monte or somewhere like that. I forget where it was. And JR walks in, and I forget who was on his staff at the time, but he walks in and he says, "What are you guys working on?" Da, da, da. And then he walks over and just picks up the phone book. Says, okay, let's find out about that. And he just starts going through and starts making phone calls. And go, well, yeah, can you do this? Can you? Well, how much good? Well, do you know somebody who? And the guy spent about 20 minutes doing like deep, agonizingly, abrupt research, quick, to find out something that we've been sort of, what do we do? And he just walked in with, here's how you do that. And he just sort of blew, and he never ever did that again, but nobody ever needed him to do that again, because we saw, you want to be complete, you want to be excellent, don't let anything, slip. What are you trying to do? Do it the best you can do it. Again, there's no perfection, there's just, there's just excellence. But he demonstrated what that was in 20 minutes. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That's so true. But and I remember, I thought you were going to go into the time design era, because that's when I rolled in and I started. I was just a scrappy young kid learning time design. Sometimes in my keynote, I'll do my little. It's a cross between, let me show you my life, a lecture on my book, and then I have photos of time design. We used to load it up with all sorts of, way before your iPhone and that pretty little quote you have of Martin Luther King. We used to have, the quotes of JR or John or whoever, and then all those steps in time design. And secondly, you could talk about that. And the other thing I wanted to just jump into is, I didn't get to know about Michael Bookbinder, but what was very interesting for me was, I heard he was fantastic. Is I talked to JR, I'm inside like everybody else, and I'm like, man, I sure wish I would have just sat down with Jared and really remembered. I had just a hard time retaining anything, but JR would just scribble on, we'd be at Denny's. I can't tell you, I have my Denny's little paper where he scribbled the numbers, and he does your whole wave every 7 years. And I'm like, ah, so I took a photo of it and saved it. And it has my DNA code of that, 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 that. So anyway, I'm in New Mexico. Somebody hands me a Dan Millman book because I wish Jared would have showed me how to read the numbers and numerology. And Dan Millman was taught by Bookbinder, and he made a whole book on kind of like breaking down numbers and numerology. And it was a really nice thing. It was like JR showed me, go get that book and read it so you could finish how to look it up. I didn't memorize anything, but I've got it as a nice little reference. Not that but numbers meant a lot to JR. I mean, he was breaking it down by the way you look at it, because he studied personology, and then the numbers and everything. Can you touch on any of that and time design? And what did
Yeah,
that?
I don't know how to connect those two. I mean, time design was just the tool that we ran across. We'd sort of created our own little tool as we were creating through Insight. We were creating sort of a personal productivity workshop or whatever, and looking for tools for that. And we had 2 or 3 pre time design tools that we were using for people to help just do that stuff. And it was kind of initial versions of completion and keeping track of your commitments and et cetera. Back in those days.
It was taught down. It was taught up down. I move into JR's house and it's like, here it is. Here's your box. You're gonna top down.
Yeah, well, it was a great systematic way for people to trust that people had a good system, and that you could hand things to them and that it wouldn't get lost, and they'd have some way to keep track of all that. And that was pre-digital world. Back then, the time design book that we came across, I forget who it was. He wound up getting the USM. He'd found that system in Europe, and it was only in Danish and German and Swedish, I think, at that time. And he said, wow, this is really cool. And so he wound up trying to start to get the license to get that book into English and get it into America, and then use that as a business to sell a great planner. And then we wound up running across that. Russell Bishop wound up seeing that and saying, hey, that's really cool, maybe we should do that. So he wound up getting the license, and we wound up getting the license to distribute the time design book in the US.
Nice.
It was called Time System in Europe, but because it was called Time System, but there was already a Time System company in the US, so they couldn't use the same name. So that's why it showed up as Time Design. But at the time, it was such an elegant tool, still is. If I went back to a paper planner, there's nothing better than that as a way to sort of organize your life and to see the gestalt of all the different levels of things you're committed to. You keep track of them and have them in your hand in a cool tool. So we use that as part of a lot of our training. We just gave that tool and then had people actually implement in that tool when we were doing those trainings back in, 1981, 82, 83. We were starting to do that stuff. And then, but at a certain point, that was not the best tool. Until that, I had the integrity that was the best tool on the planet to implement the methodology that we'd come up with. So I felt very comfortable giving that tool and saying, this is the best one. Do it if you want, but we had people actually use that tool. As soon as the Palm Pilot showed up, this little digital thing, and that world showed up out there, I said, this paper-based thing may not be the best tool. So we had to give it up.
Nice.
So that was, but we lost a lot of, didn't lose money, but we lost a big revenue source because we were including the book as terms of the seminars we were doing. So that's I don't know. That's,
well, I think that's what's happening now is we're going from tape to CD. The COVID's knocking down brick and mortar, and now we're Zooming. I think this is a big dip, isn't it?
Yeah, no, not really. It just put on steroids the change that was happening already. The world was becoming virtual, and most people becoming self-contracted people instead of working for companies. So that was already happening. This just put it in spades. Just made it a whole lot faster. Back to the numbers thing. Fascinating about that. You do your birth date and you come up with a 325 or
Yeah, yeah.
426 or whatever those things were. Turns out that JR and I and Michael Bookbinder all had the same 325s.
325.
Yeah. So
Can
JR said
you
that's why people will think we're like brothers.
can you talk about 325?
Expression, cooperation, freedom. So there's a negative path of that. There's a positive side of that. Positive side of that, if I express positively, cooperate with that positive expression, I have a sense of personal freedom that shows up. If I'm in a negative expression, I'm hung into it because I've got the cooperation, and then I feel like I'm in jail.
Yeah.
So those are, that's a simplified version of basically what JR's interpreted as those numbers, and I get it. That was pretty much me.
How do
And
you
Catherine, by the way, Catherine's a 415, and she winds up with a 5-2. So Catherine and I both have freedom on that back end of this thing. That's why she and I get along so well for 30 years. It's because we're both just freedom junkies. But that's just how we're wired numerologically anyway.
Yeah, I loved the book, and I did, I kind of skimmed over it for about a week, and I just thought it was just JR saying continue your education, and you're part of it as well, and Robert Waterman and a lot of other people. uh, I wanted to touch on Mind Like Water. By the way, I'm a Bruce Lee fan too, and all that. I'm using your, I got to hang out with you. Thank you so much for those times, because I use a lot of I call it, you call it GTD, I call it getting ready to do Soul Transcendence SEs. So what I do is I get rid of everything that's in my head. I do have a trusted system. I use OmniFocus. I did get it out of you that Catherine uses it. Thank you. Only because I saw Justin Jane use it, and I was like, what the hell's that? But I kind of went back to you. Look, to have a little bit of this, and then I have a recorder if I can't write fast enough and I'm in some other twilight state. But if I dump, my SEs are brilliant. They're just much better. And can you touch on that?
No, you got it. I mean, that's pretty simple. You need to get rid of the material distractions. It makes it a lot easier to focus on the immaterial, sounds and noises and voices and communication. The universe is always on. Meditation doesn't mean you slow down the universe. It just means you slow down your universe. You can listen to the one that's always on. Right? It ain't stopping, guy. It's rolling. It's all rolling right now. That river is flowing.
Wow.
Let the river run. So it's just about to what degree do you need to just stop and pay attention to the river? At some point, I don't know, maybe I've fallen off my spiritual path or not. I don't know. At some point you just relax and go, look, guys, it's all the same thing. So whether I'm connected to the sound current, which I actually was at one time, in a very real way. But I don't want to dwell on back. That was one of those back then kind of things, and I don't want to,
Yeah, because I think
live
you're
in that
on it.
glory.
Yeah, because JR says if you think that was it, keep going, keep going. So
Yeah,
you're in the keep going mode. I would reframe that.
yeah. Certainly keep going. But the music's in just looking at my window. It's there too. And again, there's obviously much more subtle levels and much more and things that could be quite interesting, exciting, and developmental to be experiencing on the inner planes for sure. So I'm still just a bare beginner at all that, Jesus. So I just go, well, I'll do my best. But basically, I think my best is not resisting whatever it is that I'm involved and engaged in, and then being able to just manage that appropriately, so I give myself appropriate time and appropriate space to be able to listen, and then pay attention and engage with whatever those other levels are. But those other levels are already going on.
Yeah,
Again, that's part of the call power. I think just makes you think you don't have it yet.
that's right.
So you got to do more to get it.
That's right. And then, by the way, your painting gives you away, though. See the one in the back, the one with the souls going home.
Yeah,
You painted that, right?
I did.
Right. I'm not done with you yet.
I'm not done with you yet either.
I just love our connection in terms of. I remember sitting with you and Catherine, and you asked me, and it was so subtle. And you asked me, when are you going to get married? And I was like, what? You said, when are you going to get married? I'm like, I don't know. And you said, well, write it down. I'm like, huh? And what happened was that conversation, it was over dinner too. It wasn't like, okay, sit down, here's a let me work with you. No, it was like that little questionnaire ended up being that I wrote it down. And then Nicole and I, a we do the weekly or monthly mining, or weekly mine. What's it called? Yeah. So we're like, hey, what's on your mind? What's going
Mind sweep, yeah.
on? Mind sweep. And we're like, we'll sit down and go, hey, do you want to relook at the wedding like in November next year? Sure. Because then what would happen was her dad ended up dying of cancer, and then she's coming out of that grieving. So we address it. We do what you started at that dinner. Hey, what do you think about here? Well, let's talk about it in December. And I just think it was so subtle, and it had nothing to do with business. So it's a misconception to say that GTD is business as much as it is what do you have your attention on, like you said. What's got your attention, and how do you have the awareness yourself about it if you don't have when two or more are gathered, meaning you need the other person there to do the back and forth. Otherwise you unless you've got the awareness to go, this is where I got my attention, let me go.
Well, it depends on, whether you need or want other new perspectives or inputs to make sure that you've sort of covered your bases, or if that other person is also engaged in whatever the activity is. So you get buy-in on the front end, that they're part of the creation process.
And that might be like part of your healing thing, is that you had the curiosity to say that because you saw it. Here's a band-aid, or here, fix that if you want. I don't know.
Yeah,
What was your process?
I don't know. I grew up in a family of educators and teachers and so forth. So I always thought, academia and teaching was probably going to be what my profession was. I didn't have any idea it was going to be this. So who knew? So I dropped out of graduate school and went on my personal exploration to try to find out who I was. But then I'm not so much I'm not even a motivational speaker. I sleep as long as I can. You know I go, guys, look, I've been graced with figuring out a methodology or an algorithm or a formula that allows you to get a lot of this material stuff off your mind, so it's not distracting to you and gives you a lot more space to do what you want to do with that space. I don't tell you what you should do with that space. That's your choice. But if you're on a spiritual path or have a focus on more reflective kind of life, it's going to make that a lot easier. But you don't have to do that. I'm not interested in proselytizing. I'm probably one of the worst, ministers in that way. I was like, I don't really care what people are doing. They're on their own path. If
Yeah,
they invite me and ask me like you're doing,
yeah,
I'm happy to share
yeah,
as much as you want. But that's not my path.
yeah. JR would say that, and I'm getting that more and more. Makes me want to retreat. Is he says the best thing you can do for people is leave them alone. And then the higher you go, not to say that I'm high or anything, but the more you get a perspective on it, you're going, yeah, that's their karma. You need to step out. When they give you a call, sure, be available.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I wanted to ask you about two more things. I know you got something to go, but can you talk about go backwards, because we didn't start that way, but I'd like you to go Bruce Lee martial arts, and and when you how you came into the movement, because I love that story. I did ask you that before, but I love the stories you tell. I don't really, it's not about, I like stories, and people that are tuning in every night at the JR marathons, in satsang they're called. It's great to interview the different people that knew JR back then. You know why? Because you're in the darn videos. So I play those black and white ones. You look pimped out like you just saw Saturday Night Fever. So so hit me the martial arts, because I did. What attracted to you? What can you leave us with about the martial arts and how that influenced you? And then go to those moments when you first came out of Berkeley with JR, right? It was you and Russell in Berkeley with JR.
No, me and Michael Bookbinder and Faye Whitemountain.
I love a little bit of that, man, before you go.
Okay, well.
And by the way, let me just be very clear. Like JR has always said, when I was making his movie, because some people left the movement and they're in the movie, he said, look, they were good then, and so put it in the movie. And so for me, it's like, to me, he was good then. I didn't know him. I'm not saying good or bad. I like stories. So give me the stories. If you want to. You don't have to do anything. You can paint, by the way, the next 15 minutes.
Well, my wife at the time and I were invited up to a party in the Berkeley Hills. And we went up to this party. I was in graduate school in American Intellectual History at the time.
Do you have a year?
And
do you have a year?
1968.
Nice.
And we were invited up to a party in the Berkeley Hills, very hip group of people, watching homemade movies of a girl nude in the pool. You know, it was very cool, and smoking a lot of really good dope. And, you know, there was a guy sitting across the room with kind of a small guy, kind of wiry, interesting, curly hair. And he came over and just introduced himself. And I don't know, we started to chat and whatever. And then I said, by the way, would you like to smoke some really good dope? Because I brought some hash back from Afghanistan when I hitchhiked through the Middle East back in 1967. And so I had some very good stuff. So he said, sure, let's go upstairs. So we went upstairs and smoked a little of my Afghani hash, which was nice. He said, by the way, you want to have some really good dope? And I went, really? You mean even better than this? He said, yeah. So come up to my place. So further up the Berkeley Hills, you know, my wife at the time and Michael and I went up to his place that he was renting and smoked some incredible stuff. I don't know where he came from, but whatever. It was, you know, like we were zonked. And then he came up and, you know, and said, you know, watch this. And he did a karate punch at my face like that. And I could feel, he said, feel the air. And I could feel this air vortex coming at me just from the punch that he gave me. And then he started to tell me the story about, you know, how he had grown up. You know, he remembered being born. He had webbed fingers. He was all kinds of, you know, interesting stuff. When the veil came down for him when he was 7, it got very confusing to him about why people were doing what they were doing, because he came from a different place and sort of saw who people really were, but how they were screwing it all up, and felt very pained in that. And there's a long story and all that. And so he wound up leaving home, running away from home, and then finding all kinds of stuff that could match his energy field that he came in with. So he got a black belt in karate. He was an Olympic fencer. He then joined the mob in Philadelphia because they were the only people that would relate to him at age 14 or 15 as an adult. He used to go, you know, blow up cars for the mob, you know, just for whatever reason. He ran guns for the CIA in Guatemala. You know, this guy was incredible. He was a medic. You know, and all that was just to find things that could sort of match his stimulation of the energy field that he was working with. And then, you know, and he was totally depressed, alcohol, drugs, whatever, just to try to stay sane, you know, amidst all of that. And then one day he lay down in the bed and was taken out of his body and shown why he had gone through all those experiences, and that there would be people coming toward him that he owed something to. And, you know, for 3 days, he was sort of out of his body. When he came back in, he was able to see through walls. He was able to do all kinds of stuff. He was then studied by the University of Pennsylvania as a psychic. That were back in those days, you know, kind of very interesting, you know, research in what psychic phenomena was. And Michael was just a demonstration of it. He had it, he could do it. So anyway, that's a much longer story than we need to to go into here. But anyway, Michael then came out to Berkeley with the Hertzfeld twins that he was engaged and involved with in Philadelphia. They sort of escaped their world and came out with Michael, and they were in Berkeley. And that's where he was sitting at this party and looked across at me, and I said, "You're one of them." Now, he didn't tell me this until 2 or 3 years later, what all that was, but he said he knew he owed me something, and that he needed to transfer some energy to me. So he also played flamenco guitar. He fenced. He did all kinds of things. So he said, "Should I teach David guitar or karate?" And given what he saw about me, he said karate would probably be a better thing for me to experience, being kind of the passive guy that I am, And so he offered to teach me karate. And that's how I got involved with Michael Bookbinder. And he and I started to just train on the campus of Berkeley University. And that's how I got my black belt in karate, was working with Michael Bookbinder. And he would work up with visions about all kinds of things and whatever. And at a certain point, things got really weird for me, because I started having these incredible experiences. I was at this, after I dropped out of graduate school, I had just this kind of factory job that I was doing. And then one day, the spirit just hit me while I was on a lathe trying to do something. And suddenly this thing happened, and I saw Moses, I saw Jesus, I saw the whole line of travelers, just in front of me while I was conscious. It's like this thing was just happening. It's like, oh my God, what the hell is this? And so I just had to stop and leave. I pretended I was sick. So I said, I need to take off. And and so once that happened, then my whole world just started to change like crazy. It's like I suddenly saw people in a whole different way that I'd never seen people before. Anyway, again, not to make the story too long, but what happened was I couldn't understand it, and I got pretty angry. And at one point, I felt like there was something going on with me, and so I called Michael on the phone. I said, "By the way," and Michael said, "David, I think you're possessed." I said, "So can you get rid of it?" He said, "Okay." So he cut himself off from me, basically shut down all the communication. By that time, by the way, I'd gotten a divorce. I'd walked out of the marriage. I'd walked out of college. I'd walked out of everything. I was like, oh my God, I'm in a whole different universe. And so, I literally walked out and, demonstrated some pretty aberrated behaviors, and then they wound up putting me in mental institution. So I wound up in Napa State Mental Hospital. And then at some point that got so painful, I decided that I wouldn't get less crazy. I would just enter into a high state of cooperation. So I'm still nuts, but you're looking at a high state of cooperation here.
I love that.
And then what happened, and then I found out, then I came back, and then Michael and I got back together, and then I was walking down Telegraph Avenue in Berkeley and walked into Shambhala bookstore and just looked down, and I saw a book called The Gateways to Spiritual Science, Rudolf Steiner. I wonder what that's about. And I picked it up, and I went, oh my God. I suddenly discovered this whole universe, the masters and the theosophists and Madame Blavatsky and Ledbetter and all these people, Krishnamurti and all these, and the people that were, there's a whole science and spirituality. I'd never known that. And it's like, oh my God, there are people that probably out there know what I've been going through and what this thing is that I've tasted and what was out there. And so Michael and I both sort of delved into all that literature, and basically we said, okay, we need to meet one of these masters. How do we do that? So one day at the end of 1971, one of our karate students, one of the Hertzfeld twins, said, by the way, I just had my aura balanced and had a light reading from this guy named John Roger in San Francisco. And Michael, being kind of as psychic and sensitive as he was, he said, oh my God, this guy's and she told him some of the information because Michael had been on her light study. He'd been a shaman in Russia or whatever, and had saved them, the girls from, abusive parents, and they'd run off into the hills together. And he said, whoever is reading this is reading from a very high level based upon what we'd already then learned about that. He said, how do we meet this guy? He said, well, he's giving a seminar tomorrow night in Berkeley.
Wow.
Oh, wow, cool. So
remember,
Michael Bookbinder.
Do you remember the place in Berkeley? Was it a brick building?
Yeah,
house?
No, it was the Catholic Church.
Okay,
up on the, up on, I forget, up just on the northeast side of the campus.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you said,
so Michael and Faye and I walked into this room, and Looked up at this guy, and this guy started talking. I said, this guy knows, he doesn't give one flying fuck that anybody believes what he's talking about. He, you know, he gets it. I said, so I guess maybe I want to go hang out with this guy or whatever. So we suddenly just signed up for aura balances, signed up for light studies, did everything. So, December 1971, we all kind of hopped into the game. And then it turns out with light studies that I finally got from JR, found out what all that stuff had been about. And Michael had been basically, back in the Spanish Inquisition, he'd been in the Spanish Guards, and basically I was a gypsy fortune teller, a young woman, and basically he walked in and arrested me, and then I was pulled apart on the rack, in the Inquisition. And so but I created such a curse with that curse was what possessed me. So it wasn't something outside of me; it was something I'd created, back in the 1600s or whenever that was,
Oh,
and it just laid out there in the unconscious level, and then it finally came back in. So I had the chance to undo it. And JR said, it was kind of about time to leave anyway, but he certainly sped up the process, for that to happen. So there's a short version of a very long story,
no,
and
I
that's how
love it.
yes.
Just I love the stories and the times that I wasn't involved in, but it's beautiful. Uh, is there anything, I know you got to go, is there anything you can leave people with during these times of, in America, it's quite different, I'm sure, than there. Cops are doing what they're doing and people are dying and there's uprising, Black Lives Matter, not to take any position, but and then there's lockdown even worse. Now we're Italy, apparently. It's hard to believe what's what, but is there anything you can leave people with to, I don't know, the David Allen thing? What would you leave people with?
Just surround yourself with light and send it to all the world. Anybody could use it. Come on, this is nothing new, guys. Catherine just finished reading a book about the Spanish flu and how that changed the world. 1918, 1919. A whole lot more people died then. There are a whole lot more people that die of malaria that are dying of this right now.
Yeah.
So there's stuff going on all over the planet. It's just that we're all so connected now. We're much more aware of it, much more conscious of it. So just make sure you're surrounded by light in terms of whatever all that is and current reality. What's got your attention about all this? What can you change? What can you not change? And and then just move forward, one foot in front of the other. Handle what's in front of you with elegance and completion, and then watch what shows up next. The great fortunes in the U.S. were made in the Depression. So who knows what's going to come out of this kind of challenge that people are having now in terms of their lifestyle, and and the differences that are going on. But there's a lot of light at this. There's a lot of silver linings in these clouds. So look for those. Be safe, be healthy, love people around you, you know, all that good stuff.
I love you. I love you forever. And I hope when, I like to invade you, I hope that Europe, it does the same and that we all come together at one point. But I feel like I'm with you right now. So this does me for the year. Thank you.
God bless all of you listening to this. Yay.
So I'll see you later.
Of course.
Love you, David. Love you, Catherine.